The Seventh Tower by Garth Nix. Book 6, The Violet Keystone. Chapter 3. Tal opened his eyes. The crystal globe was gone. He was lying on the floor somewhere, and there was a voice droning on in the distance. Tal sat up and saw that he was in the senior lectorium, up on the last tier of the auditorium between two desks. The lectorium was empty, save for himself and the lector, who was speaking from the central pulpit. It was Lector Roram, Tal's chief teacher. A tall and solidly built chosen, a bright star of the blue, and so proud of it he dyed his beard blue and wore tiny sunstones woven into it. "Your father is missing, believed to be dead," Lector Roram suddenly roared, pointing his finger at Tal. As the lector's shout echoed through the lectorium, his skin split apart like a fresh fruit, revealing a spirit shadow within. A huge spirit shadow, a formless mass of darkness that kept spilling out of the lector's body. It was a black tide, unstoppable, implacable, flowing up the tiers, reaching hungrily for Tal. He turned to flee, took one step, and was suddenly stepping off one of the golden rods that suspended the sunstone nets high above in the red tower, stepping off into thin air. Tal screamed and tried to grab something, his arms and legs flailing as he fell. It was only then that he realized he was awake, inside a dream. No, not a dream. A nightmare. Tal closed his eyes and the scream faded away. He still felt as if he were falling, and it was as cold as it had been when he really fell from the red tower. His shadow guard had saved him then. Perhaps that was what would happen in this nightmare. Then he hit something. Tal opened his eyes to find that he was not falling anymore. He was floating in the reservoir beneath the castle. The reservoir that was home to the water spiders. Desperately, Tal started swimming. But he didn't know what he was swimming toward. Unlike the real reservoir, this one was well lit, with an even white light that extended as far as he could see. He couldn't see any water spiders at first, but then in between two blinks of an eye they were all around him. Huge, bulbous-bodied spiders scurrying across the surface of the water. Their multifaceted eyes were glowing like sunstones. Venom dripped from their fangs. If they killed him in a dream, would he die for real? "It's only a dream!" Tal shouted in panic. "It's only a dream!" The water spiders scurried closer. They were bigger than the real ones. They grew as they approached, getting larger and larger, their fangs sharper and longer, dripping with more poison. Desperately, Tal tried to remember what Mila had done to survive the nightmare machine. She had practiced her Rothkir breathing, he knew, a form of deep meditation. But he didn't know how to do that. What he did know, he realized, was the deep concentration of light magic. Perhaps if he lost himself in that, it would have the same effect. Tal shut his eyes and concentrated. He felt inside himself for the deep, pure violet of the seventh and most important keystone. He willed the light to fill his mind, to infuse his entire body. He used the violet to force back all thoughts of water spiders, one-eyed Merwin, Sushin, Sharakor, and other horrors that might be summoned into his dreams. Worst of all was that awful moment when he brought the ceiling down, killing Crow, Ebbet, and the others. He had to stop that nightmare somehow. There was Violet. Only Violet. Nothing else existed. Yet there was still one tiny part of his mind that kept screaming, one small remnant that screamed on, flinching with every second as it expected the stab of the spider's fangs, the pain of flowing poison. But no stabbing pain came. Violet light filled Tal's body. He felt calm and secure. Soon even the slightest remaining fear was banished. He was Emperor, wielder of the Violet Keystone. He was in command. Tal opened his eyes. There was a violet glow all around him, but beyond that there was nothing. He was floating in nothingness, in darkness. He could feel no breath of wind, no ground beneath him. He was somewhere beyond the reach of the nightmares, but beyond everything else as well. For a moment, Tal almost panicked. But the violet glow fought against that. It lent him confidence, bathed him in self-assurance. He would find the way out. He must. The crones, thought Tal. The crones had come to Mila and helped her out of the nightmare. Tal would have to call them. But how? Unlike Mila, he had not been trained to call the crones into his nightmares. It was a skill all Icecarl children were taught, but Tal was a chosen. Tal did have one link with the Icecarls. He bared his wrist, looking at the triangular scar there, the mark of his oath. The cuts had healed well, but were still very obvious, thin lines of raised scar tissue. Tal had thought the crone crazy at the time to cut him so dangerously, but he had grown used to the scars in time, and even to the idea that they linked him to Mila and the clan of the Far Raiders. Tal rested 2 fingers across the scar. He tried to remember the feel of the bone ship's deck, the freezing wind, the humming of the rigging of the ice ship, the clap of the sails. He cast his mind back to that time, to the crone of the Far Raiders who had made the cuts, to the crone mother who had spoken in prophecy. He tried to call them with a silent mental shout. Nothing happened. Still, Tal persevered. He kept up his call and tried to remember all the small details from his time on the ice with the Far Raiders. The smell of the Selski soup, the exact color of the sunstone that was bound to the mast, the snort of the Reska, the distant crash of Selski in their eternal pursuit of the Sleepinish. Slowly, he felt the void around him change. Wind came, a freezing wind. Then light, the particular color of the Far Raiders' sunstone. He felt bone planks beneath him, shuddering and shifting as the ship rode the ice. The darkness retreated. Tal stood next to the mainmast of an Icecarl ship, in the pool of light from the sunstone high above. The ship was under full sail, streaking across the ice, a star shooting through the darkness. There was someone else on the deck. Not a crone, as Tal first thought. A chosen. Fashnek. A whole Fashnek, his body repaired in this dream, without his spirit shadow half. He looked scared, raising his arms in horror as Tal stalked toward him, his violet glow forming a blinding nimbus around his head. "Fashnek!" shouted Tal above the wind. "I am the heir of Ramelin, Emperor of the Chosen, and you will be—" Before he could say any more, Fashnek disappeared. "Dark take it!" swore Tal. He had hoped he could force Fashnek to release him, since there was no sign of the crones. It did seem as if he had defeated the nightmare machine, but that was not enough. Even if he could choose his own dreams, he was still a prisoner. And who knew what was going on back in the castle? Even now, Sushin might be using Tal's half of the violet keystone to destroy the veil.